So with that, we'll go ahead and start. We had a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time, but we'll come back to this. We'll start with you, yes, sir. Yes, I think so. Good evening. Sorry, one thing I would love to ask as well is that as you come up to ask a question, that you introduce yourself.
James Red, North St. Louis.
Yes, sir.
This, it's a very interesting idea, and I think it's worth considering. My question is, for somebody like me, who live in a underrepresented, a underserved community, how would this benefit me? I mean, why would I be interested in such a process?
Well, I think there's a few things that I would say to that. One is, you said that you live in an area that's underserved.
Underserved, right, grossly.
And so one of the reasons behind that is that there's not enough resources to put into the places where we know that there are issues and need better resources. And part of the cause of that is that we are fragmented in a way where we have the resources in this region, but they are split up and siloed in such a way that we're not able to address the problems that we know exist currently. And so by working together, particularly on some of the big things, and having a shared revenue source to fund these local governments, we would have a better ability to address the problems that exist in communities like yours.
Okay, and this is just the beginning, what you're doing now. So I suppose that the things that have to be done will be more detailed and later on.
Yes, sir. So one of the things that we're clear about is that what we are proposing and putting forward into the public discussion and up for vote is a structure of government to help us understand, be able to operate better and actually pursue some of the solutions that we know exist to help make this region better. There still has to be a lot of policy to go behind that structure of government, and that's a conversation that I would say stay tuned for, because we anticipate having very loudly and in public and engaging folks like yourself to ensure that this new government's policies reflect what people want. Because the structure alone helps us get there, but it's not going to be sufficient on its own.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Zachary Persing. I'm here this evening not because I'm necessarily against merging the city or the county. I think it's an interesting idea that merits public discussion. But I felt a need to come here this evening because the method by which Better Together is planning to merge the city and county, a statewide vote, is profoundly undemocratic and frankly immoral. There are a few things I'd like to say. A few weeks ago, the executive director of Better Together, Nancy Rice, when speaking about the decision to amend the proposal so that the St. Louis County executive would not get a 2-year unelected term, said, quote, "The public's told us loud and clear that that's not what we want, so we changed it. I think the public has been telling you loud and clear that we do not want a statewide vote. We want to decide this by ourselves." Now, thank you. Now, at every turn, when it's been suggested to Better Together that a statewide vote is not the right way to do this, that has been shot down. Frankly, I want to say this. I understand why you don't want a statewide vote, because if you had a referendum in the city and the county right now, you wouldn't win. But let me humbly suggest that when you don't have the votes, the right thing to do is not to circumvent the will of the people by punting this question to voters who have no personal stake. The right thing to do is to be persuasive and ask people to consider your arguments. I'd like to say one more thing. Several times it's been said that a statewide vote cannot take place, is the only way this can take place without city-county referendums. That is patently untrue. I'm going to offer 3 ways that you can do this that would include referendums in the city and county. Article 6, Section 30 of the Missouri Constitution explicitly gives us a method for doing this via the freeholders process. Now, Better Together has said that they don't want to go down that route because that process would not allow for things like merging of the police departments and the municipal courts. I'm willing to take that argument at face value. What you could do is go through the freeholder process and then have a subsequent constitutional amendment in order to make further changes. But I'll even grant you that you don't want to do that. If you want to go down a constitutional amendment right away, the easiest thing you could do right now would say, we're going to have a non-binding resolution in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, and if we don't pass, we're done. But again, I haven't heard that from Better Together. I'm not done yet. It's not been 2 minutes. I have 30 more seconds. The other thing that you could do that has been admitted by Better Together is you could have a statewide vote and subsequently follow that by referendums in the city and the county. And frankly, the argument that you would have to have 14 referendums for the charter municipalities doesn't really hold any water, because the Missouri Constitution is the supreme law of the state of Missouri, and you are amending that Constitution. So if you put in the constitutional amendment that there would only be a city-county referendum, I really don't think you'd run into that issue. Again, I'm not against the merger itself. I think that it's an interesting proposal that should be discussed. But by depriving the people of St. Louis City and St. Louis County a direct vote on their local system of government, we are approaching this in the complete wrong way, and I beg you to reconsider. That is my question. Thank you very much.
So you raised several issues, and I want to try and get to a few of them quickly. One, for folks, because you brought some points up that I think not everyone in the room has heard before, and I want to give everyone the opportunity to participate in the conversation in that way. One, the reason that we looked at the Board of Freeholders process, which is in the Constitution, as you mentioned, as a way to combine the St. Louis City and St. Louis County. The reason that it's not available to these particular recommendations is, as you stated, it would not allow for the combining of the police departments or the municipal courts. That's just from a legal perspective.
Correct.
So you also mentioned the possibility of having subsequent votes, and the idea that, which I've said, is that if the city and the county who derive their authority from the state have the right to have separate votes from the Constitution, then charter cities, of which there are 15 in St. Louis County, could make the argument. I know.
But you're amending the Constitution.
Right. So.
Because they would get that authority from the Constitution, which you're amending.
The other part.
It's circular logic.
The other part of what we've said, and I stand by, is that the system that we're operating under right now, the assumption that you've made in that suggestion, I think, is that what we have is benign, and I think I would reject that. The status quo is not benign for many of the people living in this system, particularly people who have continued to, as we've seen in recent stories in the news, and I think we'll continue to see without some dramatic change, have their lives upended, their jobs lost, their housing lost because of the things that are happening in some of the municipal courts in the system. So there is an urgency to this issue.
Respectfully, sir, I did not say the problem was benign. That's in fact why I said I'm very open to a merger.
Right.
What I think is not benign is deciding this by a profoundly undemocratic process.
Okay, well, I disagree that it's undemocratic, but I thank you for your...
Having other people vote on our government's not undemocratic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Daniel. I was born and raised in North City. I now live in North St. Louis County. I never met this man in my life. I just want to tell you to keep doing what you're doing. Because what I don't see in here is people that look like me, who getting abused by those courts and those municipal police. I watch every one of your town halls, and I never seen nobody that looked like me get up and stand up and speak for us, the young African American. We get abused by these courts and these police. So I just want to tell you to keep doing what you're doing. I support this plan. Everybody I know support this plan. And if we want to move St. Louis forward, we have to think about the young adults that's going to take over this place when all of our older adults are gone. And yes, they are. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. What y'all want us to leave it the same way it is now? It's messed up right now.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not scared of change. Yes, y'all
Okay,
are. Y'all afraid of change. Y'all afraid of change.
I want to make sure. Okay.
Everybody afraid of change. It's scary. It's scary. I understand. It is scary. It is scary. Get rid of these municipalities and these municipality courts, because they do us wrong. They do us wrong. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay. I want to make sure we are. I want to make sure we are being respectful. If we
exactly,
this gentleman, yes.
I didn't speak when everybody. I didn't say nothing when that young man was up here talking. I didn't disrespect him. I appreciate it if I don't get disrespected. Thank you.
If you have questions, I do encourage folks to get in line and ask your questions. Okay. I believe you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
My
Brian.
name is Brian Kruger. I live in St. Louis Place neighborhood located in the 5th Ward. Somewhat as an extension of what Daniel was commenting on, So in the Metro Council with 33 council members, we're discussing a representation of roughly 40,000 residents.
Yes.
So here in the city, that would mean that there, to make the math easy, 8. So my question would be, as I walk the dog and I talk with my neighbors, be it here in the 21st, in the 5th, or in the 3rd, and they say they're silencing black representation, they're silencing and taking away black leadership. You know, Dr. Ross's article in The American back in 17, you know, is interesting. I don't know if I buy into it, and I don't know how to support the argument, but with all the discussion of the ward reduction, a lot of the common things that come up with Joe and Joan lunchbox, you know, on the street is they're taking away, you know, representation that looks like Daniel. That, you know, so what is the counter to that? Because the math doesn't seem to work for me.
So there's actually several things. I will say that one of the things the task force wanted to be very cognizant of and intentional about was ensuring that what we put forward is not something that's going to decrease the political power of the black community, but hopefully increase it. And I think there's several ways that that can be done and are embodied in this proposal. Number one, you mentioned that there's 33-member council districts for 33-member council for this new government. That was largely driven by the desire to make sure that there could be a council elected that looked like the demographics of St. Louis, the St. Louis region as a whole. So that's 40,000 folks per district. That's about the size of a state house district. Many of us know our state representatives and have good relationships with them. The other part of that is understanding very clearly that one of the things we advocate for as well is ensuring that those representatives not just exist, but have the resources to actually do things and give back to the community that don't exist today. We do have good representation, and particularly in St. Louis City. It is not on par with what we have in the city as a population. 50% of the Board of Aldermen, for instance, is not African American. About a third of our state representatives, which is what the overall population is, are African American in the region. So there's an ability to achieve that kind of representation. There are other considerations that we made to be very intentional about increasing participation from the black community in this new government. One of those things that we looked at was not having those elections in March and April anymore, but having them on the August-November cycle, because we see that research nationally shows that increases African American political participation in those local governments. This past April in the city of St. Louis, election turnout was
Terrible.
12%, I think.
Terrible.
Yeah, and that's typically what it is. Even in high turnout elections, like in the March primaries, where in a mayoral race, 30-40% is considered good. In those August or November elections, we actually see 70% participation from the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County. So that's one of the things that we looked at. One of the other things is that we looked at partisan versus nonpartisan elections. I think for Brian, you've probably heard this, you work in local government, and some of the other folks in the room may have heard this. There's no Democrat or Republican way to fix a pothole, you know, and I think that's true at some level. But when you look at the academic literature, what we found is that nonpartisan elections often mean that people with more resources personally or professionally are the ones who end up running for office. And that typically, because we know the other ways that society is structured, means that fewer black people end up running for office. So that's one of the things we looked at and made sure we wanted to continue to allow for partisan elections for that express purpose. The other things that we looked at were at-large districts. Similar, because the size of the districts are so large, it excluded certain populations. So the other thing that we looked at and was a change from the way we do things in the city of St. Louis right now is having that legislative leadership within that council elected from within, because that increases the opportunity for that individual to be a minority person. Within that 33-member council, you could have a caucus of folks, not just folks from the city, but folks from the county. We know that about a little under 150,000 people in St. Louis City are African American. About 250,000 in St. Louis County are. And so when you combine their political power, it actually amplifies and has the ability to amplify the voices of the African American community in this region. I just did the math again today to see where we would be. One of the side effects of this proposal is that St. Louis would become the 10th largest city in the country. Among those top 10 cities, we would be the third, have the third highest African American population of those top 10 cities. And so there are ways that this would absolutely enhance the ability for African Americans to have political power in this region. And I think the task force was very intentional about making sure that those things existed within this proposal, but also looking at the other issues outside of the government framework that would affect the Black community, like looking at the Ferguson Commission report and saying, what is our actual ability to get the things done that are called for in that report under the status quo? Many of those things cannot even be done under the status quo. What is our ability if, for instance, the city of St. Louis re-entered St. Louis County? The picture changes a little bit, but it's still far from where we need to be on many of those key priorities. And so we had those things front and center of mind as we put forward these recommendations. So,
Well, as a quick follow-up, and
Yes,
not
sir.
to, you threw a lot out.
yes.
Is that somewhere,
I'm working on-
I saw
it's not right now.
footnotes here, but
It's-
that would be good to be,
It's in,
be referenced.
parts
in
of it are
red.
in the report, but I'm working on some documents because I understand that that is a concern and it absolutely should be addressed.
But you're not explaining how you're gonna determine these 33 council members, what section, or we're just gonna split it up with the skill?
No, you're,
So-
thank you, we'll defer to her.
So I'll take that as Brian's last question before we move on to the next gentleman. She asked about how those 33 council districts are going to be determined. Part of the transition process is that a nonpartisan expert from one of the local universities or a group of people.
Who determines? This is the.
I was about to say, can I finish, please? Is they are appointed by the mayor and the county executive. That person has to draw the lines very explicitly in accordance with the Voting Rights Act and respecting current political political boundaries. That's explicit in the amendment language. From there, the Board of Aldermen and the County Council have to then approve those districts. So it's a similar process. Actually, we modeled it largely off what Clean Missouri, that recently passed Missouri constitutional amendment, does as far as trying to create equitable districts. So, yes, sir. If you have a question, I want to make sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sort of going to echo what the first gentleman said. Why are we letting people in Joplin and Springfield and Kabul, Missouri, tell us how we're to run our municipalities? Because we're going to be outnumbered, of course, and we don't have the unlimited funds that your organization has to go out state and market this thing.
So, just one more time for folks, from the legal perspective, this was the most legally viable path to achieve these reforms, particularly around the policing and the courts. I recognize it is not ideal. We recognize that, but that is
Not ideal, it's not democratic.
I disagree with that based on the structure of what our democracy is. These local governments derive their authority from the Constitution. Moreover, the split of St. Louis City and St. Louis County is actually in the Missouri Constitution. That's where it exists. And so changing it has to be a part of a constitutional amendment.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask, you brought up several times, was it the city of Louisville who went to a municipal type system and they saved $750 million?
No. They did not save $750 million. When we look at our spending in this region on those local governments, we spend on a per capita basis more than $750 million than what they spend in Louisville and in Indianapolis.
Can you reference a study? I mean, is there something?
There's something on our website. If you go to bettertogetherscl.com, there's a regional comparison
Okay, because
study
that's
there.
in contradiction to some other things I've heard, which I can't reference either.
Sure.
But I would like to see that referenced.
Okay.
Because it contradicts several other people that I've heard talk about this same
Understood.
issue.
It's available on our website if you can check it out. Yes, sir.
Hi, Ben Krumsig, JVL resident. I had two questions real quick. One you kind of alluded to. I was curious what the support staff for the 33-member council would look like, specifically in comparison to the current Board of Aldermen, which I think is severely under-resourced for support staff to provide information leading up to votes and that sort of thing. The other thing is, I know there's a plan to sunset the city's earnings tax after 10 years. I was curious if there was any exploration into extending it specifically for workers at the NGA site, given that we gave up a large swath of land in the name of the earnings tax?
Yeah. So the first question, our recommendation, so the way, at least the staffing of the Board of Aldermen, is that 3 or 4 aldermen each share a staffer. Our recommendation is that each council person has at least 2 staffers, one to be able to focus on constituent services, another to help with policy research. At the end of the day, that decision is ultimately going to be up to the new Metro Council and how they want to form themselves and budget those things. But that's how we think it could be successful. The other question, as far as the earnings tax, it phases out over the course of 10 years. I apologize in advance because I know that part of the NGA's financing is related to earnings tax the bonds are related to earnings tax, and I don't know the specifics of how that works, but I know that money will exist to help cover those bonds through those avenues. I'm not sure I don't believe that they're paying the earnings tax for longer, per se.
Okay, would there be any exploration into extending that possibly?
I can check, but probably not. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ron Ross, and I have a quick editorial, and then I have a simple question. Mine is very simple. Well, my editorial is this. There certainly needs to be something that needs to happen for this region. I can agree with you that businesses are still leaving, populations are still leaving, crime is increasing, and our city doesn't look that great to me. So there definitely needs to be something done. As the Republicans always talk about Obamacare, 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 but they never put nothing on the table to show a difference of something better than Obamacare. So with that, that's just my editorial. My question is, can you sincerely tell us the cities that have gone through this transition, where are they? Are they doing well or they're not?
So the places that we know about that have gone through this process are doing well, varying degrees. We looked at Nashville, we looked at Indianapolis, we looked at Louisville. Jacksonville, Florida has gone through a municipal consolidation. Charlotte, has gone through a little bit of a consolidation. It's not as full as some of those other places that I mentioned. And they've all seen economic success. They're doing much better than they were. Particularly in Indianapolis, you look at how they have grown since their consolidation in 1970. You look at Nashville, they actually have much different problems than what we have today because they are growing at such a rapid pace that they're trying to keep up in the development and it's affecting other issues. But Louisville has had some success. Theirs is more recent. They merged in 2003. But one of the things that their leaders there talk about is the fact that they were in a much stronger position to weather the recession of 2007 than they would have been if they weren't working as a united region. So one of the things that we recognize is that what we have in St. Louis is particularly unique, both in St. Louis City being separate from St. Louis County. The only other major city like that is Baltimore. And it's doubly unique in the number of municipalities we have within St. Louis County. We also know that none of the places that have gone through a consolidation of this sort have gone back on that.
Okay. I think you've answered.
And there are some other places that have been consolidated for even longer. Philadelphia went through consolidation in the late 19th century. In New York City, obviously they have boroughs, so it's a little bit different. But yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Jamaica Britt, and I was born and raised in North St. Louis. In fact, I grew up across the street on Clarence and West Florissant. 2 comments before I have a question. This is just my observation. To me, allowing a statewide vote over this merger of the city and county is just a very efficient way to ensure that your agenda will be pushed. I don't think it's fair. I definitely don't think it's democratic. We know that there are other ways that it could be done. I don't understand the value of having the voices of individuals who this will not affect getting to vote on something for us. That makes no sense. But again, I just feel like that is a way to ensure that what you want to get done gets done when you open up to a statewide vote. Secondly, we do have resources in the city. We may not have as much as we need, but they're not allocated properly. They're not allocated fairly. So I have not heard anything in the presentation or anything that I've read on your website that says that that will not continue to be an issue. Also, yes, there is a decline in residents in the city of St. Louis, but it sounds, again, this is just what I'm hearing, is that the concern did not become great until you saw a decline in population in St. Louis County. It does not seem to me, as a city resident, that any of these issues that you have in this really nice brochure or on your website were at the top of anybody's priority list until you started seeing residents vacate St. Louis County. Again, my personal opinion. So my first question is this. You said in your community-based research, one thing you kept hearing echoed with community members was about policing, and the one thing you mentioned was pay. So I am going to be very honest with you and everyone in this room. When I first started reading about this city-county merger, the first thing I thought about was police. And the second thing I thought about was how in the hell are St. Louis County police officers who only come into my city to go to a ball game or a hockey game going to effectively come in and police North St. Louis? Come in and police areas where the demographics do not mirror what they see when they get up in the morning and look in the mirror. This was my third question when I thought about that. Where in any of this is there going to be any type of cultural sensitivity training for these officers and for these folks who are going to be governing us? We already have a problem with the city police ourselves. So now you're going to put us under the authority of other people who don't understand our issues? I just don't see how that's beneficial to me, Jamaica Britt, personally, being the mother of a black child. I don't. I don't.
I think one of the things that, so can you ask your first question again, because I want to make sure I don't miss anything.
My first question was, is there going to be some type of cultural sensitivity training for these officers?
So one of the things that,
Mandatory, not optional.
right. So one of the things that that we looked at is understanding how do you bring about that kind of change for this region in policing. And we look and see this landscape of 55 police departments. So let's say that, obviously you say you live in St. Louis City and North City, and you interact with police in a certain way and they are a certain way here. Even if we wanted to, we had success in getting greater training for those individuals, we would have to replicate that 54 more times in this region to be able to know that we can travel across this region and feel safe. I'm sympathetic to your problem. I am a black man. I have a black son as well. We also recognize that, so thinking about having a system where we can achieve those kinds of reforms is the driver behind having one police department.
But is it on the table right now? Because you shouldn't even go into this merger without that being on the table right now.
Well, was the second part of my answer, is that what we talked about, and as I mentioned earlier, what we are proposing is a new structure to allow us to achieve the kinds of reforms that we know need to happen in this region. We know need to happen in this region. And what we have today is a structure that doesn't allow us to do those things. So there has to be the policy, what you're talking about, that follows with that. And that's in addition to, you talked about the resources being allocated poorly and all those other things. There has to be a serious conversation in this community about what does the policy of this new government look like. And that is a fundamental piece of this that we are excited to have that conversation. And we are launching an effort in the coming weeks actually to be a part of that, so that we have policy documents on day one of this new government, that those new elected officials have to say, okay, we heard from the community, this is what they said they wanted this new government to look like, and they can start to implement those things.
So are all of those things going to be done before this is put on anybody's ballot to be voted on?
No, but what I'm saying is that it's not possible to do that under the current structure.
No, that's not my question. Hold on. That's not my question. My question is, before before this is put on a ballot, are you going to address and have these policies already written and ready to go if the issue is approved by the voters?
Yes. So we're having those. I'm not lying. I'm going to explain what I'm saying, what I mean by yes. You got to allow me the opportunity. I know you didn't say that. I'm talking generally. Those policies will be written and in place. At the end of the day, it is up to the elected officials of the government to actually implement those policies. And so it won't say in the constitutional amendment, this is what the structure of the government is and these are the policies.
That's not my question.
So then can you restate it?
It's okay.
I'm trying to understand.
My question is, before it is put on the ballot and say, hey, Missouri voters, we want to know if you agree with this city-county merger, we already have these policies written and in place and ready to be implemented should you vote for this. That's my question, because I don't want. This is what I feel will happen. You will get this merger approved. No policies will be in place, and we'll be scrambling.
And what I'm saying to you is that we're going to start the conversation and the development of those policies in the next couple of weeks so that we are ready to go by the time this is voted on. Yes, ma'am.
Beverly Goldman, I'm finna start back with this question. I'm hearing you saying we're about to start the policy. And to me, the policy should have been started when you was coming before you start coming up and doing all these townhouse meetings. Should have been starting and hearing something about the policies, and you should have been starting getting that together.
Well, so in some ways we did do that. When we look at the documents that I talked about as far as recommendations from whether it be the Ferguson Commission or For the Sake of All study on health disparities or the Dismantling Divide on segregation, each of those documents, and Better Together's own studies, each of those documents embody policy recommendations. And when we're thinking about what structure might actually allow us to implement those policy recommendations, that's what we're talking about. This new phase that I'm saying we're going to be starting soon is about us having a conversation with the community to say, what do you want housing policy in this region to look like based on these documents, based on your lived experience, so that we can put together things that exist for this new government to begin implementing on day one. Okay.
Okay. Okay, to comment on that,
Yes, ma'am.
because I'm in on this comment. To comment on that, just like we vote for different type of districts, jurisdictions, everything that you saying as far as policy, is that all gonna be up under one voting thing? You're gonna outline everything, the policing, the municipalities. Are you gonna have it outlined? Or are you just gonna have one paragraph that's gonna encumber that one thing we vote on?
I don't think it's going to work to where it's going to say on the ballot, this is the policies of this new government. What it will say is this is the new structure of this new government, and if we adopt that structure, those elected officials are in charge of ensuring they implement those policies, they adopt them, and it's the responsibility of the citizen doesn't go away in this. We still have to hold our elected officials accountable to say, we as a community said this is what we want the policy to look like, and we are going to judge you on whether or not you accomplished that.
Okay, I'm gonna write out that question to you, because no. What I'm saying is, what you saying and me and the other young lady.
Yeah, I'm not understanding.
Right, so
Yeah.
I just write that question.
I'm happy to talk to you. I'm not.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
want to hold it up. I'll write that question.
Okay, thank you. I
out.
appreciate that patience.
It was a question, the first question was asked, the unincorporated municipalities, why do they even happen if you don't know how to include them in the other districts, the municipalities that have the police and the fire department? Why did that even happen that it's unincorporated?
It's just from a historical perspective, when the county existed in its initial form, nothing was incorporated except for maybe a couple cities, and then over time, places incorporated with certain political boundaries, and what was left behind is the unincorporated
So
piece.
in this, are we going to include them?
They will be a part of the metro city and as part of this new
They will be
government.
included, it won't be any more unincorporated.
No, it'll be places that are all under the metro city. So the city of St. Louis, and then unincorporated places, and then if you are live in a
So they still
municipality, there
gonna
will
be
be.
unincorporated, that's what I'm hearing you saying, they still gonna be unincorporated.
There won't exist. We won't be putting in new municipal districts to be in those areas. No, ma'am.
I'm not saying we gonna put in, I'm saying, are you going to include the unincorporated all together instead of just still having unincorporated?
I'm saying yes, they are included
They're gonna be
as a
included.
part of the metro city. Yes.
Okay, they're gonna
But
be
there,
included,
but there will
that's what
still
I'm
be,
hearing.
but there will still be municipal districts that don't have their own police department, don't have their own courts and other things. They have parks and recreation and fire protection if they have that. Those will still exist.
I think you all should look into that, because I don't think you should have unincorporated that don't have all the existence and entities that everybody else have. I mean, I don't think it should be unincorporated, that's just me, because I know people that live in unincorporated, and it takes a long time for the police, the fire department, and a lot of things that they don't get. And I mean, you got a house, they pay taxes, they do everything everybody else do, so I don't see why it's unincorporated. And while we're doing this, why we can't include them in this, that's all. My next question is, and brother, don't let these clothes fool you. I'm right in here with you as well, so don't let clothes fool you, okay? But my next question is, I keep hearing the state, and I keep hearing the companies and the government and the powers to be. Do we have any people like right here on the board? No. That's in the vote, that's in the trenches working with you for this to all come, like my brother. Anybody like him or me, like I said, anybody here, do we have any of those that's right there with you doing the studies and everything?
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, we also have had events at places like this. You can see a list of our board members on our website.
So you have, because I keep hearing you say companies, government, statewide, everything. I don't hear anything. Do we have just like schools, the young children in the schools? Do we have any of that on your study?
Yes, and one of the things we did was we were intentional about, and in fact, including a youth voice. We had 3 different sessions of students. We had it at St. Louis Artworks over last summer to make sure that we got the perspective of young people. And we try to include the perspectives of everyone in this region as a part of this.
And my last question.
Okay.
My last question, seriously. I think that that movie would have been fine for us to see. That's something we should have saw, because all the reading we doing, we reading, and I'm speaking on my term, I'm reading, getting a different perspective of what you may be saying. I'm reading and not understanding. And another thing I feel it should be recommended, the people that's on board with you, instead of having all these different town hall meetings, some of them could have sat on a panel, whereas we could have been asking different questions of that panel instead of just asking you the question. So that should be recommended. They should be right here with you. And like my brother said, I appreciate you getting up, taking and listening to our ideals, and you being able to come and talk to us. But you need that panel right there with you, because we need to be asking all questions, because everything that's going on is affecting St. Louis, period. And I live in the county. I grew up in the city. I live in the county, but I still come to the city for church. I still come for school. I still do a lot of things, and I do a lot of things in the county. But I got family in the city, my bank's in the city, my bank in the county is all over. So everything affects St. Louis City, St. Louis County, everything affects. So it doesn't matter St. Louis City or St. Louis County. So you need a panel with you, and I thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Amanda Davis, and I live in the North Side, and I live Kingsway East. And I have to agree with her. Why didn't you have the panel, the group here, and then why you didn't? We see information. We don't see any information about the schools. Nothing at all, other than what you just had in the back.
front. Demetrius Cooper to the front.
Only thing you have in the back is you talk to some youth groups, but we don't see anything about the schools. We don't see anything about the fire department. Those things is gonna affect me, because I live here on the north side, and I need to know that the fire department is coming from my house.
Yes, ma'am. So for the fire department, the fire districts stay as they are today. In the city of St. Louis, obviously, that is not a fire district, but the fire department will become a fire protection district, because obviously we need to make sure that service continues at a high level for everywhere in this region. On the education side, on the schools, as I mentioned as in the presentation, we set out as an organization, we were set up to look at these municipal level services, and so schools were not initially a part of our work.
Why not? Because St. Louis Public School, the city is paying for St. Louis Public School. So that should have been.
It's two separate entities. It's two different political subdivisions. Yes, ma'am, it is under the law. It is.
And in the county schools, they're paying for the schools too. So why won't
But
they
it's
put
again,
them-
it's a separate political subdivision. So, under the law, there are set up so that schools are in one part of the Constitution, counties and cities are in a different part of the Constitution, and fire districts are kind of in that same part, but under a different part. And obviously,
So when
some cities have fire departments.
So when you're merging this, it's still going to affect the schools, the funding, correct?
It will affect the funding in two ways.
Okay.
In a positive ways. Number one, so schools are actually, again, they're separate political subdivisions. So from a taxation standpoint, they will continue to receive all the same taxes that they receive today. There actually is, I think, a positive outcome on that front. One of the things that we saw as we did our studies and we did our reports was looking at like the use of TIF and other tax incentives that diverts money away from schools. A lot of the reason we overuse those tools right now is because we're trying to compete against our neighbor to make sure that whatever development happens in our little part of the community rather than in our neighbors, so that we can get that tax revenue. By having a regional approach to looking at those issues and saying, no, we're only going to issue the ones that are actually needed for economic development or to address blight, we will see a reduction in the overuse of those and so start to see that money flow back into the schools. But our proposition does not affect schools directly in any other way.
And that's a problem. Because again, you looking at my kids now, they are being part of this, money being, and they not funded anyway. No matter how you want to look at it, the city's not funding us correctly. Because I live on the north side and I'm underfunded. And that you telling me to do this, you're going to make sure the funds are going to go out equally in the north side, where it's not being now, correct?
For municipal services, but schools are separate. You know, we did the task, so when our organization was set up,
And you're saying the fire department is too?
yes. But when our organization was set up, it was, again, we were looking at those municipal services. When we started the task force, they had an interest because they were talking to folks who wanted to see schools. And frankly, you know, when we talked to folks before that, they're on both sides of this issue. Some of the people wanted us to look at schools. Some of them absolutely did not want us to look at schools for reasons I'm sure you can predict. But one of the things that our task force found was that the idea of trying to look at schools at the same time was so cumbersome. We even look back at what the Ferguson Commission did, for instance, when they looked to try to make recommendations about what could be done about school districts in the region. And even through their process, they said it's too much for us to study to be able to say with any sort of confidence, this is what it should look like from a funding and structural standpoint for schools.
But you know, schools is out tomorrow.
I recognize that. I would never begin to claim that schools are not important or critical to our region's success.
Can I have Demetrius Cooper to the front? Demetrius Cooper to the front.
What I am saying is that it was not a part of our work, and that it will. One of the things I want to caution anyone from walking away thinking is that we think that this proposition is a panacea that's going to fix all the problems in St. Louis. It is not. It is the beginning. So
where's the panel? You know, why you didn't bring the panel with you? Why you didn't bring the board with you so we could have asked them why they didn't address it?
I will take that feedback back, but this is part of my job as an employee of Better Together. So thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm taking everybody's 2 minutes that didn't get up.
Still got your 2 minutes. As you see, I've been very generous with folks, so I'm not gonna, unless you just go on for a while. I will say though to that, we are coming close to the end of time, so if you're not in line now, we're probably gonna have to take your questions. We've got some organizers around. If you have additional questions, they can write down, but we'll take the folks who are in line now, and then we'll wrap up this evening.
Good evening.
Yes,
My
ma'am.
name is Kim Squalls, and I have been a resident of North St. Louis from birth. I have so many questions and observations because the primary concern when the lady just sat down about schools, you know, can everybody hear me? Oh. Okay, the young lady that just sat down was talking about schools. Everyone knows in here that the schools are one of the most vital institutions in our community. And for you and your group to say that, oh, well, we didn't consider the schools, red flag for me. Red flag for me. Red flag. For you to say that, well, you never answered the question when it was put before you regarding the police department. You're talking about we're going to unify the entire police department. Everyone knows the problems that driving while black has created. If you are not saying, okay, we're going to do mandatory sensitivity training, we're going to, for future hires, we're going to make sure the psychological testing is on point, because, you know, I am so sick and tired of one black male being shot in the back because the white officer feared for his safety. But when they do these multiple shootings with this automatic assault rifles, they take them to McDonald's to get lunch before they take them to jail. I'm not lying.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I know you're not lying.
They arrest them. They're given a trial. They're not shot down. But these are assault rifles, but they don't fear for their safety. So I'm fearing for my grandchildren. I have 2 grandsons under this program. I'm wondering about, you keep saying better together. We came together in 2013. I don't hear any urban planners on the board. There's nobody with that type of experience that I've seen, because I've been reading. Nobody. There are studies saying, well, you know, well, this would be better. You're coming to us, to me, when I have a meeting and I want to get everybody to vote for me or vote for what I'm putting forth on the floor, have all your I's dotted, your T's crossed. You have none. None. You are so vague. You can't answer any of the questions. You're skimming over stuff like we're stupid. I mean, yeah, it really comes across, and you may not mean it, but that's the way it's coming across, that we're stupid. And, well, you know, well, we're just going to do this, and we're going to merge the services. And, you know, the only fire department that you're going to make a district is the St. Louis City. St. Louis City Fire Department is the only independent fire department in the state. We're the only ones independent. All these other fire districts have to call on each other for support. We're the only one independent. But yeah, we're going to become a district, not a fire department. You're taking our powers. You're talking about, well, we got one professor that's going to be selected by the executive director and the city mayor to select 33 council members. If that does not reek of graft, I don't know what does. You know, because it's going to be a lot of money exchanging hands. And it's going to the highest bidder.
That's not what I said.
When I asked, you said...
I said that there's an independent,
will be
nonpartisan
drawn by one
expert.
Person appointed by the county executive and mayor.
Or a group of folks appointed
No,
by the
sir,
county.
that's not what you said. I wrote it down. You didn't say that.
Okay,
You said
well, I
one
apologize.
person.
I misspoke. But it may be one person. It's up to the discretion of the mayor and the county executive. But again, I also said that those districts, they're not choosing council members. They're drawing district lines for the election of those council members.
Same difference. See, we're playing on words now.
Okay,
That's
I
same
disagree
difference.
that that's the same difference, because that's how redistricting works in a lot of places.
And then you're saying, well, we're going to have nonpartisan as opposed to partisan. You know,
No, I said we're going to have partisan, not nonpartisan.
nonpartisan experts to determine
Oh,
planners.
for the drawing of the lines.
You still said nonpartisan experts.
Yeah.
Okay, but you said you didn't. I take notes because I'm older, I'll forget. Okay, my thing is this.
Yes, ma'am.
You're talking about the citizens, and you're saying, one of your points that you highlighted on your presentation, you said it's difficult to obtain business licenses for small businesses or somebody. That's a weak point. That's so minute. That can be corrected with any municipality within their own government. That's a minute, to me, that's not that important. Tell me that we're gonna merge because we're gonna take all the tax base and all these 88 municipalities and the city of St. Louis, and it's gonna be a $2 billion tax base, and it's gonna be evenly distributed among everyone. You know, for me, it just seems like, when I first heard it, I said, some money involved. It's money involved. And it's money involved for a few select people. And for you all to bring it and say, well, you know, we're going to put it on the ballot for the state to vote. Of course, rural Missouri will approve it if, like the gentleman said, you have the resources to go and shop it to them and tell them, well, you know what, they're 22% of the population, but you're going to get some of that revenue from them. Of course they're going to vote for it. Absolutely. I would vote for it. Then you said,
I want to keep hearing what you're saying because you did wait in line as I asked, but I don't. First of all, let me apologize if I have come off as seeming as if I'm talking to you as if you don't know. I'm trying to explain the questions that are asked of me. So let me start there.
no, your presentation your presentation for me is a little bit insulting because you're talking to us like we're stupid, like we don't know there's underlining issues going on here. You know, my main thing is who honestly benefits from this merger.
So my presentation was designed to be general for every audience that I go to make sure that I'm giving the same presentation, to give the overview of what this proposal looks like so that we can get into the questions. And it's not designed to be comprehensive because there are obviously other places for folks to learn the comprehensive version. I'm interested in that being brief so we can have this kind of conversation. But please continue with your
But let me ask you
question.
this,
Yes,
Mr. Moses. From your feedback here, how many people do you really think is going to support your position at this point, right here and now, today, right now? Who do you think will support your position in this room right now?
I couldn't tell you that. I'm not going
Yes,
to
you
speak
can.
on behalf of other folks. No, ma'am, I'm not going to do that. Can you
But I'm
please
just
continue with your
saying,
questions?
my question was who benefits? Who actually is going to benefit from this merger? Because first of all, the schools will not. Our schools, we have excellent teachers, but we, as the lady said, we don't get the resources that are readily available as opposed to South St. Louis and North St. Louis. It's been going on forever. We know that. But we still turn out scholars and businessmen and doctors and lawyers. We work with what we have. So who's going to benefit this? Because for me as a grandparent, it's important that they have good schools in the city, everywhere. I want everybody, every child to get an education. But for you to say, well, you know, we didn't consider schools, that's one of the top drawers for anybody that's moving to a new community. How well is the school district? So for you to totally ignore it, it's a red flag for me. It's a red flag for me.
I hear you. I hear you.
And when you keep coming, you're not telling us about these 33 council members. You're not telling us that you will not be allowed to vote. We're not voting. Everything is being appointed. We're taking.
It's not appointed, though.
That's what you
person,
said.
the person drawing the districts, but that's how it typically works. And then you will vote on the
But
representatives.
you're saying one person. When has one person ever determined anything in this USA?
Well, and then it's approved by the Board of Aldermen and the county council.
One
People being
person.
elected.
It should
Okay.
never be
We're
one
just going to
person.
disagree on that point, but that's how,
But it should
that's how
never
it
be
typically
one.
works.
But
now.
that's a key point for people in here. One person should not have that much power. You're giving that one person too much power.
Okay. Okay.
That's too much power. So
Well,
that means
it was
I can
modeled
come
on
to
a
you and
recently-
say, I'll give you a house, or I'll give you part of my car lot if you put these people, or you make this district this huge and this one that small.
It was modeled on how other places have done this before and on a recently passed amendment in the state of Missouri that passed with 70% of the vote. But,
Okay, and you
we'll disagree on
said that, you said Indianapolis and Louisville had done it. Now, Louisville combined consolidation was like 771,000 people, and Indianapolis was 782,000 people. What will be our population?
It'll be 1.3 million.
1.3 million. So that's a vast difference. It's a big difference. So for you to say that's selective, I mean, it's so well and up, I'm just done.
Okay. Thank you for your. I would love to continue talking to you, actually, but yes, ma'am.
My name is Regina Dennis, and I'm originally from here in St. Louis. I've lived here. And oh, okay. Pull it up, son. Okay. My name is Regina Dennis. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. And I'm from here in St. Louis. Born, bred, and attended public schools here, and eventually excelled and moved to other places around the world. When I read the Better Together document, you're talking about red flags. I said, oh my God, no. And the one that stood out first was about the schools. Because if you're going to talk about reducing crime, then crime is directly linked to better education. If you're talking about better services within the community, then you're also talking about having more dentists, doctors, offices, in the community. So if that's not going to, if you have to have people who have been trained to assume those roles and responsibilities. Businesses as well too. But I didn't see any of that promoting for, particularly as it relates to African Americans. When I read this here on your page, on page 7 of your document, where you talks about the regional demographics, you got your, I'm not going to go through it all. You got the 1.3 for the combined. The combined is 1.3 total population, female 52%, white 65%, African American 30%, and Asian 3.6%. So I'm listening to you indicating that there could be, that we possibly receive some equity there. How can we get this equity when we're only going to be a little 30% with a combined city merger? That's my first question.
So I think, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that not just black people care about equity, and so there will be other people who care about it as far as the electorate. But let's say that it is just that we have 30% of the Metro Council is black, and those folks are pushing an equity agenda. Their voices are amplified by coming together in a way that they would be needed for other things to move in this region. So I think there's strong ability for equity outcomes to be a part of this new government. Such as the kind of things that you talked about as far as policies around training of police officers that currently can't exist in this region, such as other policies around what does affordable housing look like and how do we have regional resources going towards supplying the funds to actually have good affordable housing policy in this region.
I think, excuse me, let me say this. I think that you all are doing these town halls to get more points to iron out a lot of your discrepancies to make your policy, your position stronger. That's what I really
No, and let me piggyback on that. You're definitely right, because if you look at the town hall meetings where the initial ones where they planned, they were in the places where people had posed questions to them and totally disagreed with your plan, so they had to go out and try to educate and reshape and reform and try to twist and encourage people's minds. So you're definitely right on that point there.
Am I wrong?
You are, but I'm waiting to hear the question.
When it comes to the other point that really just made my goose pimples come up was the lack of democratic process, that we will lose certain abilities, the voting aspects. And when you talk about local government and not having acts, combining local governments and use the word in your document, centralizing local government, man, that raised a flag over me, because when you talk about centralized government, that means just up at the top. A few people at the top will make the decisions. Well, that's what the U.S. government does overseas. Internationally, we work as an international developer. We work in ensuring that governments decentralize, and as they decentralize, form, increase more local governments. So here we're talking about getting rid of local governments and merging so there's a city, so there's more of a centralized approach. Explain that centralized approach to me, and how will local people continue to have a voice and be able to access their local officials when you got 40,000 people?
I would say in the same way that I mentioned earlier, when folks, it's about the size of a state house district. So you have access to your state representative in the current structure, and part of that key part of our recommendations, as you clearly have read, is that we have a professional staff to ensure that folks do have access to their government. So I'm not understanding your question beyond that. I mean, we have to have a way for us as a region to be able to operate as a region. Whether we like it or not, that's how the rest of the world views us. And until we can start to be one as a region and act as in one accord, we're going to continue to fall behind in this world.
Well, my last point I would say is that as you advance and you're making your policies, you should look and include more of us as citizens, more black and white,
Yes, ma'am.
as a part of this process. Most of us, I went back and I did the reading and looked at it. You start talking about it in 2013 under Mayor Francis Slay, and then Lyda Crucius has inherited the process. But I don't know who you've included, because you have not come out and talked to many of the neighborhood associations and other people and gotten us involved in the process.
We have been to many neighborhood associations. I've personally been to the Jeff Vanderloo Association. We've been in this building multiple times to hold town halls and listening sessions for this process, and I'm sorry that you haven't been invited to those or a part of it, but we will continue and redouble our efforts to do that.
In conclusion, I am strongly in support of an improved merger, an improved region for St. Louis. I would like to see St. Louis known for more than Ferguson and the crime it is now. But the way you're talking about doing, it leaves a lot to be desired. So seek us, some of us out, and see how we can be a participant and work with you for the good of St. Louis.
Thank you. Okay. I saw you just got. Very briefly, yes, ma'am.
Well, I'd just like to.
Can you speak into the mic so
I'm
folks
sorry,
can hear you?
this one?
The other one, actually.
Okay, I'm Ellen Edmond, and actually I am from the county, but I think we definitely need to find ways to improve and share services. This is just quickly, I would say one thing that this plan overlooks that we all maybe can do something about is the fact that the state has been, I think, responsible for a lot of neglect by not funding education, not funding Medicaid adequately, and that's one reason I have concerns about what Better Together can do, or by putting all our faith in business, because those are not really the funding streams. We have to get organized, and we have to find a way of uniting with rural people who have the same problems. Not Republican, Democrat. Do you have enough to eat? Do you have a hospital in your area? Do you have health insurance? So that's one reason why I'm skeptical of some of the benefits that are supposedly going to be delivered by this plan. But I would also like to point out that the charter is not voted on in a popular vote. If you read the details of this plan, the municipal districts can have their boundaries changed or even dissolved, which is a concern for me if we're talking about keeping government local and close to the people. And then the last thing, I hate to bring up individuals, but I think that a lot of you seem very well informed, and you know that the mayor for 2 years will be our current county executive. Now, that was going to be the mayor for 4 years by fiat, no election. Better Together has retracted a little bit in light of the current issues with our county executive. He's facing a lot of federal subpoenas for graft and corruption. And some of this has resulted in increased costs for the county. So I think I'd really like to know how you can justify having him for even 2 more years when, you know, if this plan is implemented, one of your, you know, there's been another study on the economics that some of you might want to read by Terry Jones and some other people from Webster. But we also, if we want to look at waste and everything, I think we have to be very mindful of corruption, partisan politics, and bringing in a person who's already under question without an election. So I would like to know what Better Together's plans are for dealing with that.
So as I mentioned, with regard to the county executive and the role that individual will play, during the 2-year transition, the county executive and the mayor co-lead, they're co-equals.
No, she's a transition
No.
deputy mayor. It's not really clear.
It was
that-
changed.
Oh, you changed
It was changed.
Well,
When we made that change, we heard from folks in the city that they wanted more equal part of this table.
okay, even as a
So-
co-equal, though, I'm wondering how you're going to address this.
So what I was going to say is that it's whoever is the county executive at the beginning of that transition. This gentleman, Mr. Stanger, has been is being investigated allegedly by U.S. attorneys, and so right now he's the duly elected individual. If there's someone else in that position, they will then be that transition mayor with him. So.
He could easily still be in that. I mean, it takes a long time to resolve things.
Well, I mean, there's due process, and if he's the person who was elected and who's serving that position, then that is the appropriate individual.
Well, no, I'm saying you're the ones who are saying it's the person who's in that position who automatically becomes the mayor for 2 years, and I'm.
But I'm saying that that's
suggesting
inaccurate.
You're saying the mayor.
They're co-equal with the city mayor to lead this
Even
transition.
co-mayor. I'm suggesting that is not giving people an adequate choice. He may still be in power, but a lot of us may feel that is not a good choice for him to get a 2-year extension.
I understand. And it's not an extension. His term would end in 2022 anyway. So, okay. So, thank you. Very briefly, please.
When you do all the study and get it together before we vote, are you all gonna come back and wrap it up and give us boom, precise presentation before we go into vote?
Sure.
Are you all gonna do
Yes,
that?
ma'am.
Second of all, you had a slideshow. Can you put it on the web, or can you give me your email, or I'll give you my email?
Yeah, I can talk to you afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll stick around. Okay. I'll stick around and talk to folks. Yes, ma'am.
I get to tax thing. How's this debt that the city holds?
So the question is about the debt for the city.
How's this gonna work if it were?
So what happens in the current city of St. Louis will be set up it's a legal entity called the municipal corporation. It's a governmental entity, and that debt stays with that corporation until it's paid off. But it's also guaranteed that the revenues to pay for that debt are provided by the Metro City from revenues generated within the city of St. Louis. So, I mean, the earnings tax phases out over 10 years. If the new government decides they want to dedicate all the revenue from the earnings tax to that debt, it can be paid off within 7 years. Yes, ma'am. So, real quick before folks leave, I want to say 2 things. One, thank you all for taking the time to come out and hear from me and talk with me and ask your questions and offer your thoughts on this. I do genuinely appreciate you taking the time, because there's a lot of other things you could be doing tonight, but you're engaging in what I believe is a really critical conversation for the future of our region. I hope, and I don't think, given the conversation tonight, that this conversation doesn't end tonight. So continue to educate yourselves. If you have more questions, I will stick around. My colleagues will Jack, Tina, Larry, and Molly are here. They can also answer your questions. I encourage you, if you have questions that you leave here tonight, you think I want to have some more follow-up, go to our website, bettertogetherstl.com/ask, and there's a place you can ask questions. We answer them. Oftentimes, we'll actually put the answer on the website for other people to have their questions answered as well. So thank you.